So I've got beside me one of the most exquisitely well-engineered tandem bicycles available. This is from Santana Tandems, and they've been in the tandem bike industry for almost 50 years and have mastered and carefully crafted the design of tandem bikes that not only ride superbly well, but actually disassemble and pack into a travel suitcase so that you can fit this tandem bicycle in your checked baggage when you go bike touring around the world. You can see that the joints that link the tube together are just super refined in line with the tubing. It uses high-end components all throughout, and of course it is a very premium and expensive bike. The point of this video is to demonstrate how we can convert this bike into an electric touring bike using Grin's all-axle motor kit. One of the things that makes the Santana Tandem bike ride and handle so well is that it has extremely high lateral stability so that the two riders don't flex the frame as they're both pedaling. And that's achieved with a very wide tube down here, which requires wide bottom brackets. So this system uses a 83mm bottom bracket, and it's an eccentric bottom bracket to allow for the belt tightening in order to have a belt drive between the two sides. And that eliminates the option of using most of the aftermarket mid-drive kits that would normally go in a conventional size bottom bracket. So that takes us to the realm of hub motors, but if you look closely at the rear triangle of this bicycle, it's quite different from any other conventional bike frame design. The actual dropout width is a full 160mm, and that's a tandem standard that Santana themselves pioneered early in their development in order to increase the rigidity of the rear wheel build. When you have two riders all sitting on the weight of just a single wheel set, you're increasing the likelihood of the wheel buckling. By going to that much wider dropout standard, they can eliminate any dishing, so you have a perfectly centered dished rear wheel. You can also see that they've got a large oversized rotor. It's a 10-inch diameter rotor. On a tandem bike, you've got double the mass going down a long hill. That means twice the amount of heat that you have to dissipate in the rotor, and so the bigger size rotor just has more surface area in order to help cope with that heat generation. And what that means at the end is that none of the standard off-the-shelf hub motors are going to fit this frame. It's narrower than a fat bike hub, but it's wider than any kind of mountain bike or touring bike. And finally, tandem bicycles also pose an interesting challenge when you're doing a conversion and you want torque assist, because usually that requires adding a torque sensing bottom bracket. But because you have both the captain and the stoker pedaling, the distribution of torques and forces really can impact whether you're sensing the force of one pedal, of one rider, or both riders. And a lot of consideration is needed to add torque sensing with the bottom bracket torque sensor on a tandem bike. With Grin's all-axle motor, the torque sensing is in the rear hub. None of that matters, and it equally measures the net torque of both riders. So we were able to work closely with Santana Tandem over the last years in order to make an adapter set for our motor to perfectly fit this frame and its geometry idiosyncrasies. And that's available with our Santana Tandem adapter set that works both with the 160mm quick release dropouts and also Santana's newer 167mm through axle dropout option. So we're going to start off by simply moving the tire inner tube, the 11-speed cassette, and the large 10-inch diameter disc rotor from the original hub wheel onto the motorized wheel. This bike is using an 11-speed road cassette, which is a slightly taller stack with wider spacing than your 11-speed cassettes. Unfortunately, the all-axle motor totally supports that. You just have to remove or don't use the 1mm spacer that exists on the back of the free hub body. So when we take this off, we put it directly on the free hub without any spacer underneath there. With the cassette on one side, we flip around and transfer over the disc rotor on the other side. So a standard all-axle motor uses a 1mm spacer under the disc rotor to get a little bit more clearance for the caliper. With Santana Tandem's alignment geometry, we need to replace that with an 8mm disc spacer that comes in the kit. This disc spacer has its own set of threaded holes, so it bolts down to the disc mount of the side plate and then provides a second set of threaded holes for actually securing the disc to the spacer. So with the rotor now installed, we're able to add on the axle extender. This is what brings 135 millimeter dropout to 160 millimeter dropout while connecting with the splines on the axle so that the torque arm can still transmit all that torque to the stator of the hub. So this piece is somewhat integral with the torque arm itself, and it has a channel for the cables that keeps the wires themselves from rubbing against the rotor. And this should be quite a snug fit on top without any wiggle or play. As I said, it's a pretty snug fit, so sometimes it's good to just gently tap down the torque arm and the extender to make sure that they're totally flush before we tighten up the two screws that then lock that whole assembly together. Be sure to put a couple drops of Loctite on the threads before you put them in. So now all that's left remaining is the end caps. So if it's a through axle system, we'll install the 12 millimeter through axle end caps that fit inside a through axle dropout. In this case, we've got the 160 millimeter quick release. On the quick release end caps, there's actually 3 parts to install. On the cassette side, not only do we have the end cap itself for the cassette, but there's also a retaining sleeve that slides over the axle prior to installing the end cap. And that retaining sleeve is really important because it is what secures the free hub body from sliding out when the wheel's installed. And then the smaller diameter piece here goes over on the disc side, and that fits right inside that hole left on the torque arm. And now we have a 160 millimeter space hub motor. Be sure to keep your original quick release skewer because you're going to have a hard time finding off the shelf a skewer that's just the right length for this hub. Although in a pinch, if you lose or misplace the skewer or you want to keep one with your original rear wheel, sometimes the skewers for 170 millimeter fat bikes will work okay, possibly just with a few washers under the end. With that hardware on, all that remains is moving the tube and the tire back over onto this rim, and we can plop it on the bike and see that everything's aligned. Look at that, perfect fit. So next up, we're attaching the frame clamp to the chainstay of the bicycle, and this is what connects the torque arm to the bicycle via just a single point of contact. And that really simplifies any future removal of the wheel. You can leave the frame clamp in place, simply loosen this one M5 bolt, and then the entire wheel assembly can slide out. But while the wheel is in position, this guarantees a full reaction torque of all the hub motor. This piece itself is attached to the beautiful frame via a pair of hose clamps. You really don't want to scratch up such a lovely paint job as this, so we include some nice silicone rubber sleeving that will go over the hard metal band. What I always like to do with these hose clamps is ensure that the actual tightening screw is sort of hidden, not visible from the side out there, and then to bend and break off all the excess metal tab that's here, and then all you see are these nice two clean narrow bands around the frame. It's easier to bend and break these if you take the wheel off the bike, which I just did. Quite important that all of the fasteners related to the torque arm are tightened to the specifications in the manual, which is generally around 6 Newton meters. It's calibrated by my thumb pressure. And really important not to forget the nut on the underside that links the swiveling part of the frame clamp to the machined aluminum part. That also needs to be quite tight so that there's absolutely zero play anywhere in that attachment. Now, all of the motor torque has a nice direct coupling to the frame. So this installation we're going to be doing with our phase runner motor controller. It does have a slightly higher maximum phase current, 90 amps versus 80 amps for the base runner controller. And it's a more appropriate controller when you're just using external batteries. In this particular case, we're using our LIGO batteries, and we may be mounting LIGOs in multiple places. And that allows us to easily have a wire harness that plugs in here that connects to all the various batteries on the bike. Now, there's a lot of options for the placement of controllers and components on a tandem bicycle, but the best practice from the point of view of electrical efficiency is to keep the controller as close as possible to the motor. If you have extension cables between the controller and the motor, that's where the current is the highest, and that would have the highest losses. It's better to have an extension over to the battery pack than on the motor phase wires. So in this case here, I think the perfect place will be to strap that straight to the rear seat tube. The cable will reach the motor, and then we'll run the short torque sensor extension cable from the controller to the motor as well. So with the motor and the motor controller here at the back of the bike, we have a longer stretch than normal in order to reach the front handlebars where we have the display, throttle, and e-brake hookups. Unfortunately, Grin has a range of extension cables anytime you run into a situation where the stock cable length is inadequate. So in this case, all of those signals run on a single main 9 cable, and we have a 1 meter extension that's going to allow us to easily bring this to our super harness that then branches out to all the various peripheral components. Now, normally when we're running cables on a bicycle, we like to have the electrical wire follow the brake or the shifter housing, and that provides a really tidy line that you can have your electrical cables travel along using spiral wrap to hold those two things together. Unfortunately, on this bicycle, even though it has cables running to the back, these are unshrouded cables that are running bare, which is great from the point of view of shifting and braking because there's less friction, but you don't want to strap your electrical wires to an unshrouded shifter or brake housing, because then you'll add a lot of resistance when you're trying to change those gears. The straightforward option is just to use a bunch of zip ties around your tubing in order to secure the electrical wires in place, but that looks rather unsightly. And in this situation, we have one more trick up our sleeves, and that's these cable raceways. So these are just like you'd have doing wiring inside a house where you want your Ethernet cables on a wall to be neatly concealed. It's got adhesive tape on one side, and then it just peels open, giving you a nice channel for the wires to sit inside. The cover snaps back on, and then your electrical lines look really clean, and you don't have a bunch of bands wrapping around your tubing that are used just to secure the wires. So as you can see, this bike doesn't have straight handlebars, but it's using curved drop bars, which is pretty common and popular with touring bikes, but it adds a lot of complexity to the normal hardware you'd mount on an electrification project, as you can't slide things over the curved bar, and the grip tape increases the diameter. Normally, all the things you attach to the handlebar, like throttles, displays, up-down assist level controls, those are meant to clamp onto a 7/8 diameter tubing, but it won't work when you have the grip tape on here. So Grin has a convenient solution for this, our handle bob mounts. These are just little stubby machine tubes of 7/8 inch diameter that allow you to create protrusions on which that hardware will fit. So we've got 3 display choices with the super harness kits, but 2 of those options have the up-down assist button integrated with the display, which means you need to mount it on the handlebar near where your grip is, and again, that won't work with the curved bars. Fortunately, our large size 750C display mounts central right over the stem and has a separate set of button switches to control. So the simplest method of having manual control over regenerative braking on these systems is with our bidirectional 2-way throttles, but unfortunately our standard version requires a straight bar in order for the grip to slide over. So on this bike, we're going to have to set up a brake sensor where you use the digital brake sensor to engage regenerative braking, and then the throttle on the bar here in order to increase and decrease the regenerative braking force. Now on these bikes with integrated brakes and shifters, you don't have an option of just replacing this unit with a brake lever that has a built-in switch on it. We have to add an aftermarket switch. Unfortunately, that's quite easy to do using the inline cable switches here. This device, when the brake cable passes through it, it has a little magnet that binds to the cable and clicks one position or the other every time you use the brakes. And you can mount this. Typically, you'd mount it close to the brake lever itself. But here, all of the cable routing goes through the handlebar, and instead we'll be mounting the sensor right above the caliper. So all we have to do now is remove the cable from here, slide it out, and slide the cable in through this sensor. And now whenever we use the front brake, the motion of that cable will become detected. That will engage regenerative braking. And then if you wanted to increase the regen force, you can do that with the throttle that's on the right handlebar. With everything plugged in, we're now just going to bundle up the excess wires and have it wrapped around in one of these Velcro sleeves to keep it tidy. So the only thing a little awkward right now is this throttle cable, which is in this void, and we can tidy this right up by undoing the grip tape and just having it follow along with the brake and shifter leads. So that's it. All that remains now is installing a battery pack and plugging that into the phaser in our motor controller. Now this system is super battery agnostic. Literally any e-bike battery from 36 volts to 48 volts, 52 volts, even 72 volts with the phase runner will be compatible. But if you're planning to travel and fly with the Santana Tandem, then your go-to option, of course, is our LiGo 10X battery modules. So in our case here, we're just going to use a soft bag in the front triangle to pack in 5 of these LiGos. That gives us a 500 watt-hour battery pack. And then we just have to run a single battery cable to reach the phase runner over here. We'll plug that in and be off to the races. So that's it with sort of a quick and dirty installation of a 500 watt-hour battery in the front triangle. We just ran the cable with zip ties over the tube to connect to the phase runner. But our plan for this bike is to carry more like 10 LiGo batteries or 1 kilowatt-hour of battery capacity. Since it's a tandem bike, that means there's 2 people flying, so each person can easily bring 5 LiGos with them in their carry-on baggage. And the 1 kilowatt-hour battery capacity is a very nice energy reserve to have on hand if you're doing long-distance bike touring. This Santana Tandem is such a perfect platform for that kind of global world exploration, and we sure hope that with an electrified kit like this, we open the door to many, many more people to set out on adventures across continents and countries. Hope you found this video informative, and we look forward to seeing many more of these on the road.